Marjorie, you're still muted. No, we can't hear you.
Hello, now you can hear me. Sorry for the teething pains, but good afternoon and welcome to the very first event in this year's series of Hooked Education workshops as part of the Wigtown Festival Company's outreach work. My name is Marjorie Lotfy. I am the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Wigtown Festival Company and also a writer and poet. And I'm really thrilled to be welcoming the always brilliant Dean Atta. A little introduction to Dean. Hello, Dean.
Hello.
I'm just going to tell you all a little bit about Dean and try and sit in the shade. It's so unusual to have sun here in Scotland. Dean's debut poetry collection, I Am Nobody's Gger, was shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize. And his debut novel, The Black Flamingo, which I've got here, won the Stonewall Book Award. He was named as one of the most influential LGBT people in the UK by The Independent on Sunday. His work often deals with themes of gender, identity, race, and growing up. And it's appeared on BBC One, BBC Radio 4, BBC World Service, and on Channel 4. He regularly performs across the UK, and I've seen those performances. I can't recommend them highly enough. And internationally, he's also a member of Malika's Poetry Kitchen, and he's based in Glasgow and is co-director of the wonderful Scottish BAME Writers Network and a patron of the LGBT History Month. Dean and I will be with you for the next hour or so, but before I hand it over to Dean, I'll just give you a quick rundown of what's going to happen today. He's going to kick off with a 15-minute performance, followed by, I think this is the order we're going to do it in, a 15-minute bit of activity, so make sure you have your pens and paper to hand. And I'm even going to try and join in on that too. And then we'll finish up with a Q&A of about a half an hour. If you do have questions for Dean and you're joining us through YouTube or Facebook, please head down to the comment section, or if you're joining us through a screen share or a platform without a comment section, please go ahead and scan the QR code in the top right corner of your screen. If you have any problems or concerns, please reach out to an event moderator in the comment section. And we just want to say a final thank you to the Hollywood Trust, the Scottish Book Trust, Creative Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway Council for supporting our work with young people, and of course to Dean for joining us. Hi, Dean, and thanks for coming today.
Hi, thank you. And thanks everyone who's watching. I'm really excited to get your questions and just to know that you're there because it's me and Marjorie right now and we want to hear from you because we see each other a bit, Marjorie. So yeah, it's really exciting to get to share some of my poetry and some writing prompts today. So that's something that I'm really keen to do and going to get cracking with, I guess. Shall I?
Yeah, please do. That would be great. This is the bit where I get to sit back.
Yeah, you get to sit back and enjoy, but I'm sure you've got some questions for me as well, won't you, Marjorie, a bit later?
I do, yeah.
And Marjorie said that she's going to join in with the writing, so it's not just me on my own pretending I can see you all. So Marjorie's going to join in your place, everyone. So, you know, we are going to do this live, which I'm really excited about. So I'm going to talk to you first about my poetry and how it's kind of helped me in my life in terms of well-being. So poetry is something I kind of got into as a teenager in terms of writing it, but I always loved listening to it. I loved books and stories that involved rhyme. I loved musical theatre, loved songs, and I used to write down lyrics of all my favourite songs in a little notebook. And it was just, yeah, lyrics were kind of my route into poetry. So some people, you know, say they're pretty much the same thing, but I think there's something different about something that's intended just for the voice, no instruments, just the voice. So there's a lot of musicality in poetry, and I definitely love that. And for me, poetry, I believe, should be said out loud. I think you can really enjoy hearing the musicality of the voice when you hear a poem out loud, whether it's read by the poet themselves or by someone else or by you. You know, I think thinking about when you pick up a poetry book or a single poem, reading it out loud can really show you what it's all about. And you'll hear things that you might not see. So that's something that I would recommend to any poets or appreciators of poetry. And one of the poets I really appreciated when I was younger and still do is the poet Maya Angelou. And she wrote lots of incredible poems that spoke to people all over the world. She is an African-American woman, and she was the inaugural poet for Bill Clinton, and I believe also for Barack Obama. And so she is someone that you may have seen in that capacity, or you may know her poems without knowing who she is. So I would definitely recommend looking up Maya Angelou. Her life and her autobiography is incredible when you see how much she's been through and overcome. And I think this poem in particular, Still I Rise, is one that I wanted to play you a little clip from. So if the tech is working, we're going to hear a little bit of Maya Angelou's poem, And Still I Rise. I think we can't hear her voice.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to take the risk of reading a bit of it myself, because I think she is incredible, and you can see her beautiful face there on the screen, but you can't hear her voice. So, but this is the beginning of that poem, just the first 4 lines for you. It goes, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise." And the poem goes on in a really strong, bold voice that kind of talks about overcoming so many things that people may throw at you, or history may have put in your way. And so I feel like this poem was one that really opened my eyes to kind of the power of poetry in terms of protest and in terms of claiming your own voice and overcoming and speaking truth to power. And it's something that I tried to channel in a poem that I wrote called Ascension, and it was in my first collection, and I just wanted to share it with you now. It's called Ascension. I have risen, and yet I feel like I'm falling from grace, falling short of my potential, falling out of favor with those who expected, predicted, were counting on so much for me and my future. If this is the future, take me back to the past when I had hopes, dreams, and ambitions, and not just debts, regrets, and not quite yets. When a blank page offered up infinite possibilities and not just a potential paycheck, and an escape from a job where I get no respect. And yet I rise to positions of responsibility and accountability. I rise to capitalist desires, not at school waiting for playtime, but at work waiting for payday, daydreaming of a play date where butterflies would lift off from a pit of acid, rise and make noise in the form of words strung together as a puppeteer connects to a puppet. I rise to the occasion. I have been cocooned too long. My flight is imminent. I boil over in a storm, and though torrential rain may descend upon me, the same water that sustains my being and form, I rise above and beyond, standing on the wings of the butterflies and treading the raindrops like a stairway to heaven. And yet, although they fall, I rise, like the towers that scrape the skies. Though oxygen is thin up here, I stand tall while others crawl and gasp for breath. I breathe the air of the gods, filled with stardust and plane emissions. I don't need an engine for my ascension. I rise from sleep and depression and found all other psychological conditions remained. And within a system of liars, the truth seems like insanity. So how do I defy gravity? I rise free from my former inhibitions to realize the only opinions that matter to me are that of God and my mother. See, with a clear destination and a strong foundation, we won't stop precipitation. But when you understand the cycle, you don't fear it any more than a river fears evaporation. The sea has been in the sky, so why can't I? I rise, I fall, and through it all, I learn to linger a little higher. So
Beautiful.
Thank you, Marjorie. In that poem, I was trying to kind of show the balance of like rising and going for your dreams, but also kind of seeing some of the challenges that are there. but knowing you can overcome them. And I kind of look towards, the natural water cycle as an example of something that rises and falls. And maybe in our lives, we have cycles. Sometimes we're up and sometimes we're down, but we learn to get a little higher as we go through life. And I kind of used the parallels between being at school and being in various jobs I had before I came to be a full-time writer, and where I knew I wasn't doing what made me truly happy. And now as a writer, and when I was writing this book, I wasn't a full-time writer. I was, striving towards that. And I knew that would be where I'd find the most kind of contentment. And I think it's important, even if you're not living your dreams, to have some dreams and work towards them. And that's something that writing really gave to me. And seeing poets like Maya Angelou or Benjamin Zephaniah or Michael Rosen, people out there that were doing it as their job, it really showed me, okay, it could be done. It can be done. So that's something that I wanted to share with you and show how Maya Angelou's poem kind of inspired me in my journey as well. But that poem, Ascension, has a kind of parallel poem that I wrote in a really challenging time of my life, and it's called No Ascension. And I wrote this poem when my grandfather passed away, and it was a difficult time for the whole family. And I think because at the time I had never experienced grief in a very close proximity, there hadn't been anyone very close to me that had died. It really, really affected me. And in the Greek Orthodox Church, there's a thing that people do where they wear black for 40 days to show that they're in mourning as a family. And even though I don't attend Greek Orthodox Church, I decided to do this, and my family did this. But I kept wearing black for quite a few months after that period because my mourning hadn't lifted. And so that is kind of where this comes from. It's kind of parallel to the ascension of Jesus in the Greek Orthodox Church. That's why they do it. But for me, it was a very interesting experience, and I'll talk a bit about it after I read you the poem. But obviously, I'll warn you that this poem is about death and grief. No Ascension. You're in hospital, so we buy plane tickets. You are dying when we reach your bedside. You are dead, so we wear black for 40 days. 40 days are over, but I'm still wearing black. In London, no one knows why. In Cyprus, we moved as one black cloud of grief, the whole family dressed in the same color. And for once, I fitted in with them. We were all black for 40 days. On the 41st day, my mother says, we don't have to wear black anymore. She wears blue jeans and a white top. I put away my white and all my blues too. There is only black on my clothes rail. Casual black, smart black, trendy East London black, punk black, sporty black. Black is the only color I can be. My mother cannot be black with me, and no one else can be black for me. Either side of your grave, I was black, and this poem is about me, not you. How I haven't cleaned the mud from your grave off the shoes I bought for your funeral. How often I look at the photos I took of you, smiling, dying, dead, and being buried. How your watch and prayer beads are in the drawer of this desk I am writing this poem on. How grief makes much more sense to me than feeling depressed when times are good. How a grandfather is meant to die old and surrounded by his family, just as you did. How my notebook is a grave and my laptop is a grave. How my phone is a grave and my bed is a grave. And there was no ascension after 40 days. And I have stayed buried with you. So that poem was one that was difficult to write, difficult to perform. I shared it a couple of times when it was just written, and I burst into tears every time. So I kind of stopped doing performance of it for a while. But I published it in this book called The Dizziness of Freedom, which is an anthology with various poets all talking about mental health. And I think the effect of grief on mental health is one that I think is easiest to talk about as opposed to some of the other parts of mental health, which still have some stigma attached to them. But I felt it was really important. I was very close to my grandfather, and he actually inspired the book, The Black Flamingo, that I think most people would know me for, because I was in Cyprus visiting him, and there was a sighting of a black flamingo, and we had a moment which I have put into the book. Even though this is a work of fiction, it kind of draws from some of my real life experiences. So for the character Michael, I kind of gave him this experience here that happened with my own grandfather, and it goes like this. Grandad goes back inside. He draws my attention to the news. The story, a black flamingo has landed on the island. An expert on screen explaining it is the opposite of an albino. Too much melanin, he says. Camera pans the salt lake full of pink, but my eye is drawn to that one black body in the flamboyance. The following evening, my beach towel and shorts dry on the balcony. Couples on mopeds ride past the house. The dogs walk humans before dinner. Grandad coughs violently, then lights another cigarette. Grandma calls us in to eat. The black flamingo is on the news again. I pick the dining chair facing the TV. Grandad asks, why does it matter if he's black? Adding, the other flamingos don't care. And I am certain what he's saying is, I love you. And that was the first part of this book that I wrote. And it kind of evolved into this story of a boy called Michael, growing up in London, mixed race, Jamaican and Greek Cypriot, and discovering things about himself, his sexuality, thinking about his mixed race identity, and also discovering he wants to be a drag performer, and he becomes a drag performer called the Black Flamingo, inspired by seeing a black flamingo in Cyprus on that holiday to visit his grandparents. So I drew from lots of my own experiences to create the character in the story, but it was really fun to kind of fictionalize some of my experiences and then embellish them and take them in different directions as well. And, you know, for some of us who write, sometimes you need to write your own story, like I did in some of my poems, but then also with the Black Flamingo, writing a fictionalized version of something can be really cathartic, because you can rewrite it. You can write it the way you want it to happen, or you wanted it to happen. And then you have that alternative version, an alternative reality, and it will ring true if it's come from an authentic place for you, but it doesn't have to be true in the sense of the facts don't have to line up to the real life events. So I think that's really fun and a really great thing about writing, and it gives you a lot of agency as a writer if you can take real life and turn it into something else. And before I get you to do a bit of writing, I just want to share the prologue to the Black Flamingo. It's a very small piece, but it kind of sets up what I think I'd like you to try and do first of all. So, I am the Black Flamingo. The Black Flamingo is me trying to find myself. This book is a fairy tale in which I am the prince and the princess. I am the king and the queen. I am my own wicked witch and fairy godmother. This book is a fairy tale in which I am cursed and blessed by others, but finally, I am the fairy finding my own magic. And so what I want us to do is to think about what is your magic. And I want you to begin by literally writing "my magic is" at the top of your page. So my magic is. And you can think about what you see as your magic, what your friends and family might see as your magic, what a stranger in the street might see as your magic. So first of all, just we're going to, for 1 minute, we're going to think about what you see as your magic. So my magic is for yourself. So what is your magic within yourself? So for me, I think it is my curiosity, my sensitivity, my confidence, my identity, rich heritage. Okay, and now what would other people, friends and family, say your magic is? So carrying on with that for another minute. I'd say a lot of people say my smile is quite magical. My writing. Okay, and the final one, what might someone who just sees you think is magical about you? Someone that doesn't know you but just sees you from afar. That could be someone that sees you on social media, someone that, you know, lives in the neighborhood but you've never spoken to them. What might they think is magical about you?
That one's much harder.
Yeah. Or even what do you wish was more magical about you? What would you like to have magic in? Might be a magic power. Okay, and that's where we'll pause with that for now. Marjorie, how was that for you?
It was good. It was really fun.
Yeah.
You want to hear?
Yeah, if you want to share any of it. Do you want to start with the first bit? What did you see as your magic for yourself?
I think I maybe didn't do, I didn't do it exactly right, but yeah, I said I think the way my eyes light up at light, a love of words, of play, the way music sets the mood, my insistence on doing the daring, my never being one thing or the other, always in between. Which is maybe something to do with not quite belonging. It's a subject I'm really interested in, being half and half of things. People say my magic is being able to see what's actually happening in a room, or reading a face, understanding the gaps in stories and the possibilities in them. This may be something to do with my regular work at Open Book. I have no idea what strangers would make of me. I think I said maybe enthusiasm or energy, a quick smile or an openness. I hope, but that's what people tell you later on. But
that's lovely. And if you could have a magic power?
Oh gosh, I probably would make the sun be risen longer every day.
That's
I like the light. You can tell I'm sitting in it. As soon as we do the next writing, I'll get up and close the blinds so that you can see properly.
No, you look. Yeah. What I said for me, my magic was curiosity, sensitivity, confidence. The identity in terms of having rich heritage and from Cyprus and Jamaica, I find that kind of mix quite magical for me and what it means in my life, and love. And then I think friends and people, family would say my smile, my writing, listening to others, respecting others and being patient. And then I think maybe strangers that see me here where I live in Glasgow might think my relationship looks magical when I walk around arm in arm with my boyfriend, the way I bounce when I walk in the park. And I think if I could have a magic power, probably to freeze time. And that's more like so I could just write in this frozen time.
Yeah, an extra day a week that nobody else has is what I would really like. You're right. I'm with you. Yeah.
So moving on, I want us to do another kind of three-parter. And this this first one, so again, it's going to be a minute for each thing. So the first one is going to be I have. And I want you to think about what you have and what you appreciate having in your life right now. So as many things as you can think of, it's like a list. So just go with I have for a minute.
Do you mean objects or people or emotions or anything?
Anything, yeah. Another 30 seconds on that one. Okay, next one is I want. So what is it you want? It could be right now, it could be in the future. They could be objects, they could be states of mind, they could be people. What do you want? Another 30 seconds on that one. Okay, and stop on that one. And then finally, I need. So they should be different to wants. They're a bit more kind of fundamental things that kind of are, you know, really essential to you. What do you need? Okay, another 10 seconds on that one. Okay, Marjorie, let's go in turns. So I'll do my first I have, and then you do yours. So I put, I have an audience and readers. I have family, friends. I have a notebook and pen that were a gift from a really thoughtful friend. I have a warm home and a cup of tea beside me. What do you have, Marjorie?
I have a plethora of words, 2 strong legs, my health, family, kind friends, all the makings of an amazing meal in my cupboards, the ability to conjure the places and people I love.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I want to be more generous and not fearful of being taken for granted. I want to use my voice and resources to make a difference.
Gosh, those are good. I want light. This is a theme. Plane tickets, time to write, time with my kids, empty days in the diary. I want to explore, to see adventure in the everyday, to feel gratitude for what is in front of me. I want to be able to go home. So.
Thanks for sharing that. I need to be connected. I need to feel part of a community, but I also need to take time out sometimes.
That's a good one. That mix is really tough to get, isn't it? Yeah. I need light, back to light, laughter. I need my body to be healthy because I'm a big outdoors person. The hills and the sea. Words, double jumpers for winters in Scotland. That's not negotiable.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you, Marjorie. All right. So I think for people that want to, after this, expand that, I think thinking about these kind of different ways of looking at your kind of yourself. So looking at, how you see yourself and how others see you, and also, what you have, want, and need. You could shape those into kind of like 3-section poems. So if you refine with each bit of writing that we did. So for the first one, for your magic, looking at how you see yourself, how those close to you see you, and then how those at a distance might see you. Or if you had a magic power, that could be the 3rd stanza. And then for this one we just did, I have, I want, I need, having 3 stanzas that kind of talk about that, but where you kind of refine it to kind of like bring it into kind of parallels with each other, perhaps. So that would be how I'd kind of take those forward. But I know we want to also answer some questions, don't we, Marjorie?
We do, and there's a stack of them. I was going to say, I think if you were trying to develop a character too, this would be a really fun, both of them would be a fun exercise in terms of imagining what that character wants and needs, or what they think their own magic is.
Yeah, as a fiction writer as well, I would agree. And I think sometimes you will be writing characters that are your kind of like primary characters that you need to know inside out, and you want to do lots of writing on them. But I think also if you're writing secondary characters, I think it's good to do this kind of work with them as well, so you know them inside out also, and so that you know what their motivations are and how they interact in the story based on how they see themselves, how others see them closely, and how others see them from afar. And haves, wants, and needs, I think, are very great for character development. But I think also, kind of coming back to ourselves, I think it's just good to reflect, because I think you could do those exercises tomorrow and come up with completely different things, and you could do them in a week or a month or a year, and you could track kind of how you're doing. It's if you journal, I think these could be good prompts for journaling as well. So not just creative writing you're going to share, but for writing that you just use to reflect on how you're feeling, just checking in with yourselves. Because I think a lot of us tend to do that using social media. We check in a way of kind of like posting it out there. But I think if you kind of keep it to yourself, it might be interesting to kind of come back to, how you're doing, what your haves, wants, and needs. Another thing I like to do, kind of linking to that, is like a gratitude list, like at the end of any day, what you feel grateful for, and finding, 3 things or 10 things. You realize it's actually, there's a lot to be grateful for. And I think writing it down can change your outlook. So I'm a real advocate of writing, not just to be shared, but also just for yourself, and a lot of the time I write things for myself, and don't think I'm going to share them. But then I look at it a year later and I'm like, oh, I've dealt with that, I've processed it, and I feel safe to share it. So maybe now is the time to look at it with fresh eyes and maybe tweak it a bit, edit it, and then put it out there. But I don't always think about the audience straight away. I think that can really hinder you as a writer.
Okay. And do you journal every day?
I don't journal every day, but I've had periods where I've done that, and it's interesting kind of to get into that reflective mode, but not every day, no.
Okay. Listen, I've got a stack of questions, but you all have a stack of questions out there too. So we'll just start working through them. The first one is saying that the book is a joy to read, and it really is. Why did you choose to write it in verse? Because it might not have been clear from your reading, but I'm just going to open to any random page. It is in verse, largely in verse. So how did you come to make that decision about how to present it?
Well, that's my kind of style, and I love writing poetry, and so the idea of writing a novel only seemed kind of manageable, like, or summitable, like
Yeah.
as a novel in verse, which meant I could write each part of the story as a poem, and I could build it up that way. I'm dyslexic, and I think that kind of has been a huge thing in my life in terms of like kind of how long it takes me to read and also, you know, to write. And so poetry was the kind of the thing where I felt like, you know, you can write really short poems and they can have a huge impact. And so I felt really comfortable in poetry because the less words, the less mistakes you can probably make.
That's terrible.
But no, in seriousness, I just knew for this character, this voice, a verse narration was going to work, and within the book as well, there's individual poems that the character Michael writes. He even writes one about Maya Angelou that I mentioned earlier, about how her words can kind of really speak to things so simply and so powerfully. And I think that's kind of what I think of poetry and novels in verse, kind of really just get to the heart of things, and you don't have to do tons of description and exposition. You just kind of like, you're there and you're in it and it's happening. And and I think that's what I love about verse novels, and that's what I wanted to do. And I read some really great verse novels. So The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo and Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, which is incredible because that one is set in the time period of just one elevator ride from top to bottom, just like he's going down in a lift, down a building, and that's the whole book is set in that time period. Whereas The Black Flamingo is actually set over many years. You meet him at age 6 and he's 19 at the end. So, you know, you can do lots of different things with storytelling, where you can use a compact period of time or a really expanded period of time. But with my writing, I kind of jumped through his life periodically with different episodes.
And we pick up, you know, in different places, and it just feels natural because we feel like we know him. So we kind of just, as a reader, you're really happy to just find out that he's 2 years older in the next page. It works beautifully. You know, it doesn't feel like we're missing. I haven't felt like I've missed out on anything. I feel like I'm just there with him. It's a really nice, it's almost like looking through a snapshot book or like a family album or something. So it's lovely. Okay, next, we have loads of questions. So next question, they're going to jump around too thematically, but what advice would you give to people who feel discouraged when their poetry or writing isn't perfect the first time?
I mean, it rarely will be perfect the first time. So get used to the feeling. And, you know, and maybe it's just telling you, you know, that there's work to be done. And I think that's fine to work on your poetry. I think if you get a great first draft, you're really fortunate, you're really lucky, something's really gone well that day. But I think I wouldn't expect it. You know, it doesn't happen very often that your first draft is going to be one you want to share with the world. So just get used to editing. That's as much part of being a writer as the initial writing and the first draft. So, and that's something that, you know, just takes some getting used to. It could also be worth buddying with someone, finding a friend that also writes, and you can give each other feedback. And you can ask for the kind of feedback you want. You know, you can ask for someone to just tell you what's good about it, or you could ask for someone to tell you what could be improved. You know, just be clear with the people you're showing it to, why you're showing it to them. Do you want their feedback, or do you just want them to read it? You know, because sometimes you don't actually need people to tell you what they think. You just need them to hear you. And I think that's really valid as well. You know, just here it is. I needed to get this out, needed to get this off my chest. But yeah.
And can I just ask you, when you're editing, because I know that that's a big thing for all of us writers, your own process, do you need a period of time between the time you've written something and being able to edit it? Or do you go at it right away, or do you put it in a drawer? I'm just curious because I think others will want to know what your process is too.
Yeah, if there is time, I take time. You know, if it's a commission piece, it's got a deadline, then, you know, you kind of have to speed up the process somewhat. But if there's time, you put it down for weeks or months, and then you come back to it. Or again, if I'm, you know, in a group, like I'm in Malika's Poetry Kitchen, and we each term have an opportunity to share one of our poems with the group, and everyone gives you feedback on it. And that you know, because usually you're getting like 10 or more people's feedback on your poem in a safe environment, you know, with people that you know somewhat. And that's really, really great because you get to, you know, receive feedback and take it or leave it, you know. So my editing kind of is about taking time, showing it to trusted people and getting their feedback. And if I'm working on it for a commission or a book, then I have an editor or someone who can give me feedback from that point of view as well. So yeah, I think there's my own, but I can get it to a stage where I don't know how to make it better, and I really need someone else to tell me. But I'd say get it to where you feel really proud of what you're about to show someone, or you feel stuck. You're like, I don't know what else I can do. But often just kind of taking a break from it and going to read can really spark some new ideas, because you'll see a turn of phrase or something done in someone else's writing that you're like, oh, I need that. I need something like that in my poem. And then you figure out how to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great advice. Next question is completely different. I'm just starting to get into poetry. Who or what should I read?
Ooh.
I know.
I'm a big fan of Yrsa Daley-Ward, Nikita Gill. I'd go back to people like Maya Angelou again and again. I am a big fan of spoken word poets like Holly McNish and Deanna Roger. Caleb Femi has a new book out called Poor. There's a lot of great people out there. So yeah, it's a really rich field, and very diverse. So I'd maybe anthologies as well. There's a great anthology that was put together especially for teenagers called Slam, You're Gonna Want to Hear This, and poems selected by Nikita Gill, and it's got an accompanying audio book with it. So that's always a great way to get into it, by hearing it from the poets themselves.
Yeah, great. I'm just going to swap questions around because this one that's just come in is really interesting. Did you feel self-conscious taking ideas from your real life and putting them in your writing? I'm curious what you're going to say too.
I felt you have to realize that you then have to make it plausible to a reader, because my own life, you know, if I told you exactly how things happen in my life, you'd be like, I don't believe you. But like, so for a work of fiction, you've got to kind of make it feel more believable than real life is, because our own lives have all these strange twists and turns and coincidences. And for a story, some of those are unnecessary. And so you have to kind of like pare it down to kind of the essential parts of the storytelling. So that was the only thing where I felt like I was leaving out some bits and pieces, but actually they weren't necessary for the story I was trying to tell. So I think unless you're writing a memoir where you're actually writing your own story of yourself, of your life, when you're working on fiction inspired by your life, you've got to kind of make some decisions about how much you want to share and how much you need to share, because if you've got the storytelling down, you know, it's kind of about the narrative arc and, you know, getting us from here to there, and some detours, even if they really happened, are not necessary.
Yeah. And in terms of people, you know, like when you talked about your grandpa, did you ever feel any discomfort about including some of those things in your writing?
No, because I don't think my granddad was ever going to read it. And the rest of my family, you know, my Greek Cypriot family are very supportive and understand that, you know, I have my version. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's something we all respect as a family, that we all have our own version of events. Like, and my mum will remember things differently to my aunt, to my grandma, to my uncle. And so we don't, only because mine's out there in a book doesn't mean it's the only version of events. And so I think learning to respect other people's version of events is an interesting thing to be able to do.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. That's interesting and right, I think. And it gives you the right to write it, which I think is really important too, without feeling like you have to somehow give all the versions in one that's distilled, which is impossible. So yeah, that's great to hear. Two questions that maybe go together. What challenges did you face from taking your poetry to the page to performance? And then maybe could you talk a little bit about how do you keep calm and manage your nerves while performing?
So I guess the only obstacles, what was it? Challenges, I think.
Challenges from taking poetry from the page into performance, or how did it? Maybe it didn't come that way. Maybe
Yeah, no. The only challenge was like snobbery. You know, people that thought that because I'd been performing my poetry that it wasn't page poetry, that I was a spoken word poet, and that was it. But you know, you have to write these poems before you memorize them and perform them. So that was something that I always found quite interesting. That there's this big kind of seen as a kind of divide between page and stage poetry, and that's just people kind of maybe even a bit scared of the fact that not only can people write but they can perform. Whoa, double threat. So I think that was interesting for me, but you know, once I saw it on the page and worked with you know, friends and then editors to get it how I hoped it would be. One of the best things you can do is just get someone else to read it back to you, like to see how they read it, like so whether the line breaks and the punctuation are doing what you think they're doing, because if you hear it only in your own voice, you won't actually know how other people would interpret it. So I think that's one way to do it. So if you've got a friend that you can hand your poem over to and get them to read it back to you, and then you can see if it's kind of reads the way you think it should, and then you can make changes based on that. Or even if that's difficult, just record yourself reading it as well, and then hear where you breathe, where you pause and take breaks. Are they reflected in the written version of the poem, or are you breathing in different places? And can you put those by virtue of line breaks or punctuation, can you put that into the page version of the poem so that other people receive it the way you would naturally read it?
That's interesting. So do you always, I'm just curious because, you know, some poets use line breaks in a completely different way, but you're talking about breathing at the end of a line. Is that what you mean? Like sort of making...
I mean, you can do line breaks to kind of like break the meaning and give double meanings. But you can also use line breaks for breath. You know, not everyone will read a poem that way because they'll like use enjambment and they'll just carry on across, you know, from one line to the next and just use full stops as punctuation, but kind of trying to think how different people might read a poem. So some people will pause at each line break, thinking that's a natural place. And especially if you break the stanzas, that gap kind of indicates a break and a pause. So, you know, why have you put that gap there? Don't just do it because you want to make all the stanzas irregular. You know, they need to be 4-line stanzas for no good reason. Like just thinking about that, you know, don't let the form overtake, you know, the readability of your poem.
That's great. That's great advice. And do you always read your own poem outside? I mean, I think you must do. Always read it aloud. Like, are you hearing your voice?
Yeah. I often do it as I'm writing it. I remember one workshop where we had 7 minutes of writing time, and I didn't realize I hadn't muted myself, and I was like whispering the poem to myself as I was writing it along. And then when we came back, I was like, did everyone hear me the whole time? They're like, yeah, but it was quite soothing.
Okay.
So I am interested in how it would be said, and I think it's really great to hear them. You know, with the Scottish BAME Writers Network, we did an audio anthology recently of the work we'd done in Hannah Lavery's workshops, and it's just so lovely just to hear the poems out loud, because I think, you know, anthologies written are wonderful too, but I think there's something about, especially when you're dealing with people who might have a variety of accents, or you know, use other languages in their work, or might be singing or doing different things with their voice. I just think, you know, you can't get all that on the page all the time. So I think, hearing it out loud, listening to poetry, whether it's, you know, on the radio, on YouTube, or the poet's own kind of sites, I think it's really great way to take it in.
Absolutely. Okay, another question. At the start, you mentioned your love of rhyme came from lyrics and developed from there. Have you ever tried to write a song or put music into your poetry?
Yeah, it's something I did for quite some time. I kind of wrote with music in mind, and I collaborated with musicians. So I made a couple of EPs working with musicians and producers, and they're still on Bandcamp. And so one was called Reason and Rhyme, and the other one was called Missing Piece, and the other one was called Love or Money. And I got to collaborate with lots of great musicians on that. And yeah, and I also wrote a hip hop musical called Scratched Out, and that was performed in a few theatres in London. And so yeah, I have done it, and I think it's another art form though. I think working with music is its own art form, and I think you have to really dedicate yourself to it. And I think for me, I'm pretty happy with the words on their own. At this point, you know, I love collaboration. I've got a collaboration in the works where one of my poems called Two Black Boys in Paradise is going to be turned into an animated film. So I do still love collaborating in whatever medium, especially if it's going to bring more people to hearing the words, or the story that the words convey. So I'm up for it, but I also know, you know, I'm not going to be the next, I don't know, my mum always thinks she used to say you should be like Craig David, and then she was like, oh, you should be like Drake's emotional. Like
that could be another poem, all the things that your mother thinks you should be.
Yeah, totally.
That would be a fun one to write, I think, actually. And then to come back to it at our age and figure out, or at least my age, I'm older even, and think, yeah, every 10 years, the poem, which is what your mother thinks you should be, still thinks you should be.
Yeah. And that's not to say she isn't proud, but I think she looks at, you know, poetry has, you know, unless you're going to be a poet laureate or a Macca or, you know, the inaugural poet or go viral, I think, you know, there are limited avenues of big success for poetry, whereas music, it seems like there's so many successful musicians. So I think that's why, you know, a mum will see that, you know, you've got a way with words, why not put them to music? Like that's where, you know, success and money lies. But if it's not what's in your heart and it's not the route you want to take, I think you should stay true to what's right for you.
Good advice. Good advice. Okay, I want to there's a couple of questions in here about performance itself. So I wanted just to get a chance to ask you those before we finish up. But tips for anyone wanting to try out spoken word for the first time, but also, you know, this idea of nerves. Do you get nervous before you perform? And how do you manage it?
Yeah, and I get more nervous actually when I'm reading rather than when I've got a memorized poem. And so I'd say memorizing the work is probably better for being able to give, if you're able to memorize work, but like it's better for giving the full performance, being able to make eye contact with your camera or with your audience in real life. And I think, yeah, being able to use, you know, your full body in the performance of a poem can be really impactful for any audience. So I'd say, yeah, where you can memorize, I'd go for that. And you can do that by maybe recording the poem and listening back and reciting along with it, or just reciting it in the mirror to yourself or to your camera phone or on your laptop. But just, yeah, it's just practice, you know, for that. You just got to do it over and over again. And I think where you have a device where you can record yourself, I think that's a good way to do self-critique and see what's working and, you know, where you can do it slightly differently and, you know, inflection and body language and all of that stuff to consider. But yeah, and if you've got a pal that can watch you perform over and over again, or a parent or sibling that can deal with that, then you know, utilize that. If someone's willing to be your audience, you're really lucky, because a lot of people's parents or family won't be interested, and that's okay as well. But you'll find people that are interested and do want to support. I've got friends that, you know, my mum will always come if I invite her to one of my shows, and I've got friends whose parents and families never come, but they're not discouraged because they find new, you know, people within the performance world that will, you know, be their supporters as well. So don't always expect those closest to you to get it. Like, they won't always get why you want to do this, and especially if it's not like making you money, but that's not the only reason to do it. It could be for the satisfaction of, you know, being heard or being in this kind of community of people that appreciate words in the way that you do. I think that's one great reason to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what do you do about your nerves? Do you just power through them, or do you have any tips?
I mean, sometimes you got to just own them and kind of, I sometimes tell audiences when I'm nervous, when I'm particularly nervous, I'm like, please be kind. I'm feeling fragile today, or I'm about to read something that means a lot and is, you know, really a difficult one to share. You know, not that, you know, and I think it's also worth giving people warnings if you're going to be dealing with topics that might trigger them. Like when I read about my grandfather dying, I warned you because I think it's important to realize that, just because you've dealt with it doesn't mean other people are ready to hear it, because they might be dealing with it right now. So, if someone's just lost someone yesterday and you lost your grandfather a few years ago, you're in a different place to them. And for them, it might really kind of throw them. And of course, you can't know that, but if you can warn people, that's important. But I think, with nerves, I think it means you care as well. Like, if you're not nervous, how important is it to you? Are you really challenging yourself? Like, I feel nervous when I'm doing something unfamiliar or a new piece or to a different audience than I would usually perform to. And those nerves actually give me some energy as well.
Yeah, I remember a director of a festival saying to me before I went on stage, "Do you feel nervous?" And I said, "Oh, just a little." And she said, "Good. I always really worry about the ones who don't, She said, "Those are the only ones I worry about." So I think that's, it was good to hear it, because I was the least famous person in the room for sure. But she was saying everybody gets nerves. And if you don't, then actually you're past it. Or you, as you say, maybe you don't care about what you're about to deliver or something. So that was a good thing to hear. I'm just making sure I haven't missed any questions. While I do that, I want to ask you what you thought about the inaugural poet, if you saw the poem.
Oh, I loved it. And it very much resonated with Maya Angelou's style of poetry, that, it's understandable, it's speaking not only to the moment, but to history, and it's empowering, and it's one that's kind of got memorable parts that you could kind of refer back to, that you could quote quite easily. And I think it's a public poem. It's a poem for everyone. It's not necessarily a poem to be like critiqued and, in the way that we might in a literary magazine. But it's there for that moment to be heard and understood right away. It's not one that needs to be like taken apart, because it's, we bring something to it as listeners as well. Like, it's what it means to you in that moment. And I think that's what I don't know if other people call it that, but like I call it, public poetry.
I was just going to say that, do we call it a public? And do you know yourself when you're writing something that feels really public versus something that feels really personal? Or is it just what comes?
It always feels personal to me. Like, I don't really take on a commission that I couldn't put my whole self into. Which sometimes means I have to kind of circle back to the person that's asked me to write it and say, it might be different to what you're expecting. Let's just double check, because I want to put my own experience in there. I can't speak for everyone, and she did that quite well, because, she talked about, being a skinny Black girl who dreamed of being president.
Which I loved.
And I think that's it. If you can put yourself into it, even just for a few lines, I think that makes it, that kind of makes it clear why you're the person delivering that poem.
That's a great point. I think it's a good reminder. Sorry, my cat's just let herself in the room. But,
Hello.
Yeah, there you are. Jackie. She's named after Jackie O, so maybe she was thinking about the presidents too. But it's a great reminder to even put yourself in a little bit, because then it kind of grounds the poem. That's great advice. I think we have to leave it there. I really want to thank you, Dean, for this amazing conversation and for the fun writing prompts and letting all of us write along. I'm sure that the Wigtown Festival Company would love to see some of that writing if we're allowed. But also, thank you so much for all your ideas and being so honest and open. We're really grateful. I want to remind everyone out there that you can buy Dean's book through the Wigtown Festival website, and I think there's a student discount code as well, which will be shared with you. But you can find them in all your usual bookshops as well. But particularly, it's helpful for the festival company if you get them through us. But thank you so much, Dean, for all of the personal stories and the tips and the ideas. We're really grateful to you for joining us today. I know, it's just like chatting. It's just great. What a joy. What a joyful way to spend an afternoon. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.